Anacaona is widely considered a legendary figure of Caribbean resistance and courage. Long before pirates' plantations and colonial empires dominated the Caribbean, the islands were home to thriving indigenous civilizations. Among the most respected leaders of this world was Anacaona, a woman whose courage, intelligence, and resistance transformed her into one of the greatest legendary figures in Caribbean history. Her story is not just about war, it is about leadership, betrayal, survival culture, and the tragic clash between two worlds. Early life, the birth of Golden Flower. Anacaona was born on the island of Hispaniola, the land now divided between Haiti and Dominican Republic. She belonged to the Taíno people, one of the major indigenous cultures of the Caribbean. Anacaona became respected for her intelligence, political wisdom, poetic talent, leadership ability, and diplomatic skill. Unlike many rulers remembered only for warfare, Anacaona was respected as both a cultural and political figure. The world before the Europeans. Before European arrival, the Caribbean was home to advanced indigenous societies. The Taíno had agricultural systems, trade networks, religious traditions, art, music, and organized leadership systems. Anacaona grew up in the powerful kingdom of Zaragua, one of the major Taíno territories on Hispaniola. Her brother Bohechio ruled Zaragua, and the region became known for prosperity and relative peace. Anacaona later married another important Taíno leader, Caonabo, who became famous for resisting Spanish invaders. Together, these alliances connected her to some of the most powerful indigenous leadership in the Caribbean, the arrival of Christopher Columbus. Everything changed when Columbus arrived in the Caribbean under the Spanish crown. At first, many Taíno welcomed the newcomers, hoping for peaceful relations. But the Spanish quickly became obsessed with gold land, forced labor, and expansion of empire. The relationship rapidly collapsed. Spanish colonizers imposed brutal systems of tribute and slavery. Entire villages were forced into labor under violent conditions. Disease, warfare, and starvation devastated indigenous populations. Resistance begins. Anacaona's husband Caonabo became one of the earliest indigenous resistance leaders against Spanish colonization. After witnessing colonial abuses, he reportedly organized attacks against Spanish settlements. The Spanish viewed him as dangerous. Eventually, he was captured through deception and later died in captivity. After his death, Anacaona returned to Zaragua and became one of the most influential leaders on Hispaniola. Anacaona becomes ruler of Zaragua. When her brother died, Anacaona inherited leadership of Zaragua. She governed during an extremely dangerous time. Spanish settlements were expanding, indigenous resistance was being crushed, entire Taíno communities were disappearing. Unlike some leaders who chose immediate war, Anacaona first attempted diplomacy. She understood the military imbalance between the Taíno and the heavily armed Spanish soldiers. Her strategy focused on negotiation, peace agreements, cultural diplomacy, and avoiding unnecessary bloodshed. Historical accounts describe her welcoming Spanish officials with generosity and respect, but peace would not last. The Spanish fear, indigenous unity. Spanish colonial authorities feared that indigenous leaders could unite against them. The governor Nicolás de Ovando became suspicious of Anacaona and the leadership of Zaragua. Although historians debate the evidence, the Spanish accused her of planning rebellion. Many historians believe these accusations were exaggerated or fabricated to justify conquest. The Zaragua Massacre, Betrayal and Horror. The Spanish invited Anacaona and many Taíno chiefs to what appeared to be a peaceful ceremonial gathering. Instead, it became a trap. Spanish soldiers surrounded the chiefs. Many indigenous leaders were tied up. A building filled with Taíno nobles was burned. Others were massacred by armed cavalry. This became one of the most infamous massacres of the early colonial Americas. Anacaona was arrested and accused of treason and rebellion. Soon afterward, she was publicly executed by hanging, while Anacaona became a legend. Anacaona's death symbolized far more than the fall of one ruler. For many people across the Caribbean, she represented indigenous resistance, female leadership, cultural survival, and defiance against colonial oppression. Her story survived centuries despite attempts to erase indigenous history. She became legendary because she defended her people through diplomacy, courage, and resistance during one of the darkest periods in Caribbean history. Cultural legacy. Today, Anacaona is honored throughout the Caribbean. Her legacy appears in poems, songs, statues, schools, historical studies and movements reclaiming indigenous identity. In both Haiti and Dominican Republic, she remains a symbol of indigenous pride and anti-colonial resistance. Her story is also tied to one of history's greatest cultural tragedies within decades of Europeia.